Christmas morning, 1858. Somewhere among the wide tobacco fields stretching across central North Carolina, a deal was struck that would end in fire before the sun rose again. The surviving records are fragmented, intentionally so, according to some, but certain facts remain. A child was sold, a mother was forced to watch, and by first light on December 26, one of the richest estates in the region had been reduced to ash, twisted iron, and scattered bone. The official investigation blamed overturned lanterns and careless hands. Yet those who lived through it, the ones who escaped the flames, whispered another explanation. They spoke of a woman named Ruth, of silver exchanged in silence, and of fire so fierce it softened the iron gates at the estate's entrance. What truly happened that Christmas night has been buried for more than a century and a half, hidden in courthouse basements and private family papers never meant to be uncovered. Before we continue with the story of Ruth and the fire that consumed Harrove Estate, if you're drawn to dark historical mysteries like this one, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. And I'd love to know, leave a comment telling me what state or city you're listening from. Now, let's return to North Carolina in 1858 and uncover what really happened that Christmas. The winter of 1858 had been unusually mild across the Piedmont region of North Carolina, where Harrove Estate sprawled across nearly 400 acres of rich tobacco land. It was one of the oldest estates in Randolph County, founded in 1791 by Colonel William Hargrave, a Revolutionary War veteran who received the land as compensation for his service. The colonel was a practical man, uninterested in sentiment or ornament. He built his house with thick brick walls and narrow windows to hold out summer heat and winter cold. He planted his first tobacco crop in the spring of 1792 using seed brought from Virginia, and by that autumn, he had already turned a profit. By the time his grandson, Edmund Harrove, inherited the property in 1852, the estate had expanded into a vast operation: 3 tobacco barns, a 12-room main house, a detached kitchen building, stables, a smokehouse, a blacksmith's forge, a carpenter's shop, and quarters for 43 enslaved people who worked the land. The estate produced nearly 20,000 pounds of tobacco each year, most of it shipped north to Richmond before crossing the Atlantic to European markets. Edmund Harrove was 34 when he assumed control of the estate. He had studied law at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, but never practiced. Instead, he returned home to oversee the family business. In the county, he was known as a businessman first and a planter second. He kept precise records. Every bushel of tobacco, every tool, every exchange carefully logged in leather-bound ledgers stored in a locked cabinet in his study. Those ledgers were his pride. At any moment, he could state the estate's value down to the last dollar. He was married to Caroline Harrove, the daughter of a Charleston merchant family. At 28, she was pale, fragile, and nervous, her condition worsening after the birth of their second son. She spent most of her days upstairs, reading novels and writing long letters to her sisters in South Carolina. She rarely went outdoors, and when she did, she wore gloves and a wide-brimmed hat even in winter. Their 2 sons, William and James, were 7 and 5 years old. They were cared for by an enslaved woman named Bess, who had been with the Harrove family since before Edmund's birth. Bess was in her 60s, gray-haired and stooped, but still sharp-witted. She had raised Edmund and his sisters and was now raising his sons. She slept in a small room off the kitchen, close enough to hear if the boys cried out during the night. The estate itself followed a strict grid. The main house stood at the center. To the east stretched nearly 200 acres of tobacco fields. To the west lay vegetable gardens, orchards, and livestock pens. The barns and workshops sat to the north. To the south, separated from a house by a wide dirt road, were the quarters, a line of 12 small cabins where the enslaved people lived. By most accounts, Edmund Harrove was unexceptional. He was not especially cruel by the standards of his time, but neither was he kind. He never carried out punishment himself, leaving that task to his overseer, a man named Caleb Dalton, but he never interfered either. He provided enough food and clothing to keep his workforce alive and productive, allowed small gardens behind the cabins, and granted Christmas Day off from labor. But any supplies beyond the bare minimum were charged against the enslaved people themselves. He ran the estate as he ran everything in his life, with cold efficiency and an unblinking focus on profit. Ruth was born on the Harrove estate in the spring of 1834. Her mother, Dinah, had been brought there as a young woman in the early 1820s, purchased from a trader out of Fayetteville. Dinah worked in the main house as a cook, a position that carried a certain standing among the enslaved community. She was known for her bread and pastries, and Caroline Harrove relied on her heavily, especially during her pregnancies when she could no longer manage the household herself. Ruth grew up inside the main house, assisting her mother in the kitchen. She learned to read by watching the Harrove children practice their lessons, and learned to cook by standing beside her mother, observing her knead dough and stir heavy pots. She was a quiet, watchful child, careful in her movements, with her mother's dark eyes and quick, capable hands. When Ruth was 11, Dinah fell ill with a sudden fever in the height of summer. Within 3 days, she was dead. The doctor said it was likely typhoid, though he could not be sure. She was buried in the small cemetery behind the quarters, placed in an unmarked grave among many others. After her mother's death, Ruth was sent to the fields. At first, she was too young for the heaviest labor and was given lighter work, carrying water, pulling weeds, gathering leaves after the harvest. By 14, she was working full days, bent over the tobacco rows from dawn until dusk, her hands permanently stained brown from the sticky sap. She was 17 when she met Samuel. Samuel had been born on a plantation in Virginia and sold south when he was 15. Edmund Harrove purchased him in 1850, along with 3 other men to work in the tobacco barns. Samuel was tall and broad-shouldered, carrying a quiet strength that made him respected among the other workers. He spoke rarely, but when he did, people listened. He first noticed Ruth one Sunday afternoon in the late summer of 1851. She was sitting beside the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property, washing clothes in the shallow water. Samuel had come down to the creek to fill a bucket, and he saw her there with her sleeves rolled up and her hair tied back with a strip of worn cloth. He said something to her. What it was, he could never remember later, and she looked up and smiled. They were married in the spring of 1852, in the way enslaved people married. There was no legal ceremony, no document, no official record. But one Sunday evening in April, they stood together in front of the others in the quarters, while an older man named Jacob, who had once been a preacher before he was sold, spoke a few quiet words over them. Afterward, there was a small celebration. Someone managed to get hold of a chicken. There was cornbread and greens, and someone played a fiddle until the light faded. Samuel moved into Ruth's cabin, a small one-room structure with a dirt floor and a single window. Inside were a bed made from rough planks and a straw mattress, a small table, 2 stools, and a fireplace. It wasn't much, but it belonged to them. For a time, life settled into a rhythm. They worked the fields during the day, and in the evenings they sat by the fire and talked. Samuel carved small things from wood, spoons, bowls, little toys. Ruth mended clothes or braided strips of cloth into rugs. On Sundays, they walked down to the creek and sat by the water, watching the sun sink behind the fields. Their daughter was born in March of 1857 on a cold, rain-soaked night. Ruth went into labor in the afternoon, and by midnight the baby arrived. Samuel stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a damp cloth. When the child finally came, small, red-faced and crying, he wrapped her in a blanket and placed her in Ruth's arms. Ruth looked down at the tiny face, at the dark eyes blinking up at her, and felt something shift deep in her chest, a fierce, protective love so strong it was almost painful. She named the child Lily, after the flowers that grew wild near the creek. Lily was a healthy baby, bright-eyed and quick to smile. She had Ruth's dark eyes and Samuel's broad forehead. By 6 months, She was laughing and reaching for anything she could grab. By a year old, she was pulling herself upright, gripping the edge of the table. Ruth carried her into the fields in a sling made from old cloth, setting her down in the shade while she worked the rows. In the evenings, she sang to her the old songs Dinah had taught her, songs passed down through generations, songs about rivers, long roads, and freedom. Samuel adored the child. He carved small toys for her from scraps of wood, mostly animals, a horse, a bird, a rabbit. He made them move and dance while Lily laughed and reached for them with her tiny hands. He spoke to her softly, telling her stories about places he had never seen himself, places he had only heard about from others, lands that were flat and wide, where you could walk for days without seeing another person, places where people lived free. For a brief while, despite everything, there was something close to happiness in that small cabin in the quarters. But Edmund Hurrell's ledgers told a very different story. The tobacco crop of 1857 had been disastrous. A late frost in April damaged the seedlings, followed by a dry summer that stunted what growth remained. The plants were small and weak, their leaves thin and brittle. The harvest brought in less than half of what Harrove had projected. By fall, he was in debt to a merchant in Greensboro who had extended credit for seed and supplies. That merchant wanted payment, and Harrove didn't have it. He spent the winter calculating how to cover the debt. Selling land was an option, but prices were low, and he refused to break up the estate. He considered taking out a loan, but banks were cautious after the Panic of 1857, when several large plantations in the region collapsed. By November, his options were narrowing. That month, a man named Josiah Trent arrived at the estate. Trent was a slave trader based in Richmond, Virginia, traveling a regular circuit through North and South Carolina. He bought and sold human beings the way other men traded livestock. He was in his 40s, large-framed, with a thick beard and eyes that never softened. He wore fine clothes, a heavy wool coat, polished leather boots, a gold watch chain, and carried himself with the confidence of a man who knew his business was profitable. He was known for paying in cash and for asking very few questions. Harrove met him in the study. The meeting lasted 2 hours. They sat across from each other at Harrove's desk. Trent with a ledger listing current prices for men, women, and children across different markets, and Harrove with his own books open, showing names and ages of everyone on the estate. They negotiated carefully. Trent was interested in young men, strong field hands who could be sold farther south, where cotton was booming. Harrove hesitated to part with his best workers, but he needed money. They agreed on 3 men, all in their 20s, all healthy and strong. Trent offered $800 each. Even that wasn't enough to clear the debt. Trent leaned back in his chair and studied his ledger again. "You got any children?" he asked. Harrove hesitated. "A few," he said. "Some light-skinned." Trent's expression changed. Light-skinned children brought higher prices in Richmond, especially girls. Buyers liked to take them young, raise them in the house, teach them sewing, cooking, cleaning. Younger children were easier to shape. Harrove said nothing. "I'll give you $200 for a healthy child," Trent said. $250 if she's particularly light. Harrove looked down at his ledger and ran his fingers slowly down the list of names until he found what he was searching for. "Lily," he said, "born March 1857, daughter of Ruth and Samuel." Trent wrote the name into his own book. "I'll take her." When Trent left, he carried a list of 4 names, 3 men and 1 child. Ruth's name was not among them. Lily's was. Christmas Day, 1858, began like most winter mornings on the estate, cold and gray, with a thin fog clinging to the fields. The temperature had dropped overnight, leaving frost on the ground that crunched underfoot. The enslaved people had been given the day off from work, as was customary. It was one of the very few days each year when they were not expected to be in the fields before dawn. Some gathered in the quarters, sharing whatever small portions of food they had managed to save or trade for. Others stayed inside their cabins, huddled close to their hearths, trying to keep warm. Ruth woke early. Lily was restless, teething and feverish. She had been awake much of the night, crying and twisting in Ruth's arms, and Ruth had held her close, rocking her gently, humming soft melodies under her breath. Samuel had gone to main house before dawn. Edmund Harrove had summoned him to help move furniture in preparation for a small gathering planned for that evening. Samuel promised he would be back by midday. Ruth sat by the fire with Lily in her lap. The baby was calmer now, her eyes half closed, her small hand curled tightly around Ruth's finger. Ruth hummed softly, the same song her mother had once sung to her, a song about a river, a long road, and a place where the sun never stopped shining. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, there was a knock at the cabin door. Ruth looked up, and she knew instantly that something was wrong. No one knocked on Christmas morning. No one came to the cabins unless there was trouble. Slowly, she stood, still holding Lily against her chest, crossed the small room, and opened the door. Edmund Harrove stood there. Behind him was Josiah Trent. Ruth's breath caught in her throat. She stepped back instinctively, pulling Lily closer. Harrove's face was blank. He did not look at Ruth. His gaze passed over her shoulder into the cabin, as if he were inspecting the space. "The child's been sold," he said. His voice was flat, stripped of emotion. "Trent is taking her to Richmond this afternoon." Ruth's arms tightened around Lily. The baby squirmed and whimpered. "No," Ruth said, her voice barely carried. Harrove finally looked at her. His expression did not change. "It's done. The papers are signed." Ruth shook her head. "Please, please. She's just a baby. She's not even 2 years old." Trent stepped forward. He was a large man, broad across the shoulders, his face empty of feeling. "Make it easy on yourself," he said. "Hand her over." Ruth backed toward the far wall of the cabin. "Please," she said again. "Please don't do this." "She'll fetch a good price in Richmond," Trent said calmly. "Light-skinned children always do. Someone will raise her in a house, teach her to sew or cook. She'll have a better life than she would here." "She's my daughter," Ruth said. Harrove's voice was cold. "She's my property, and I need the money." Ruth looked at him, really looked at him, at the expensive coat, the polished boots, the clean, unmarked hands, at the gold watch chain hanging from his vest, at a face that showed no trace of guilt or hesitation. "You're selling my baby on Christmas," she said. Her voice shook now. "On Christmas?" Harrove did not answer. What happened next was over in less than a minute. Trent moved quickly, crossing the small cabin in 2 long strides. He tore Lily from Ruth's arms with practiced efficiency, the kind that came from having done this many times before. The baby screamed, a high, piercing wail that sliced the cold morning air. Ruth lunged forward, reaching desperately for Lily, but Harrove caught her by the arm and yanked her back. She fought him, scratching, kicking, screaming, but he was stronger. He twisted her arm behind her back and forced her down onto her knees. Trent was already out the door, Lily screaming in his arms. Ruth screamed too. The sound came from somewhere deep inside her, raw and broken, a sound of pure anguish. She screamed until her voice cracked, until her throat burned and went hoarse. Harrove released her and stepped back. She collapsed onto the dirt floor, sobbing uncontrollably. He looked down at her for a moment, his expression distant and unmoved. "You'll get over it," he said. Then he turned and walked out, closing the door behind him. Ruth remained on the floor, her body shaking as the sobs tore through her. She could still hear Lily crying, the sound fading as Trent carried her farther away. She heard the creak of a wagon, the jingle of harness chains, the dull thud of horse hooves on frozen ground. And then there was silence. By noon, Josiah Trent's wagon was gone, heading north toward Virginia. Lily lay in the back, wrapped in a blanket, still crying. The 3 men Edmund Harrove had sold were chained in the wagon bed, their faces hollow with shock and resignation. Ruth did not move from the cabin floor for hours. When Samuel returned and found her there, he said, Nothing. He knelt beside her and held her while she cried. Eventually, the tears stopped, and when they did, something else took their place. Something cold, solid, and unbreakable. That evening, as the sun sank low and the temperature dropped, Ruth finally stood. She walked out of the cabin, across the corridors, and toward the main house. Samuel started to follow her, but she told him to stay back. "Don't follow me," she said. Her voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made him stop. She did not go to the front door. Instead, she went to the kitchen building, a separate structure connected to the main house by a covered walkway. The fire in the hearth was still burning. It was always kept lit during winter to make cooking easier in the early mornings. Ruth stood there for a long time, staring into flames. She thought about Dinah, her mother, who had worked in this kitchen for 20 years before she died. She thought about all the meals she had helped prepare, all the hours spent standing at this hearth, cooking for people who saw her as nothing more than a tool. She thought about Lily, her small hands, her bright eyes, the way she laughed when Samuel made the wooden animals dance. She remembered how Lily had reached for her that morning, her fingers grasping at empty air as Trent carried her away. And she thought about Edmund Hargrove, about his cold eyes, his ledgers, his gold watch chain, about the way he had said, "You'll get over it," as if the loss of a child were no different from the loss of a broken chair or a burned-out tool. Ruth bent down and lifted a burning log from the hearth. The heat seared her hands, but she did not let go. She carried it along the covered walkway and into the main house. She went first to the study, the room where Hargrove kept his ledgers, the room where he had sat with Josiah Trent and negotiated the price of her daughter's life. She placed a burning log on the desk, directly on top of the open ledger. The paper ignited at once, the flames spreading quickly across the pages. She stood there for a moment, watching the names burn. All those names, all those lives bought and sold, reduced to ink on paper, now curling and blackening in the fire. Then she turned away. She went next to the parlor, where Caroline Hargrove kept her expensive furniture and imported rugs. Ruth set the curtains alight and watched as the flames climbed the fabric. From there, she moved through the dining room, then the sitting room, then the hallway. By the time she reached the front door, the entire first floor was burning. She stepped out into the cold night air and stood in the yard, watching the fire take hold. Shouts echoed now. People were running. Someone was screaming. Ruth did not move. She stood there, her hands blistered and bleeding, staring as the house burned. The fire raged for hours, consuming not only wood and brick, but the illusion of ordermen like Edmund Hargrove believed they could impose on a system built on human suffering. By the time the first neighbors arrived, drawn by the glow that lit the flat Piedmont landscape for miles, there was nothing to be done. The main house was fully engulfed, flames shooting 30 feet into the air. The heat was so intense that no one could get within 50 yards of the structure. They formed a bucket line from the well anyway, more from instinct and hope, passing water hand to hand in a futile attempt to slow the blaze. Edmund Hargrove and his family escaped through a second-floor window on the east side of the house. Caroline jumped first, landing badly and breaking her ankle. The two boys were lowered down by their father and caught by Bess, who had been among the first to see the flames. Hargrove came last. By the time he hit the ground, his nightshirt was singed and his face blackened with soot. They huddled together in the yard, wrapped in blankets brought from the quarters, watching their home burn. William, the older boy, was crying. James, the younger one, stared at the flames without blinking. Caroline was in shock, her broken ankle twisted at an unnatural angle, her face pale and slick with sweat despite the cold. The enslaved people from the quarters came running when they saw the fire. Some joined the bucket line. Others tried to save what they could from the outbuildings, the smokehouse, the stables, the tobacco barns. The kitchen building, connected to the main house by the covered walkway, caught fire around midnight and burned completely. One of the tobacco barns downwind from the main house caught sparks and was lost as well. By dawn on December 26, the main house was nothing but a smoking ruin. The walls had collapsed inward, leaving only the brick chimneys standing, blackened and cracked. The iron gates at the entrance to the property had warped from the heat. Their decorative scrollwork melted and twisted. Ruth was found sitting on the ground near the remains of the house. Her hands were burned and blistered, her dress scorched and torn. She did not resist when Cyrus Dalton, the overseer, seized her by the arm and hauled her to her feet. She did not say a word. Samuel tried to reach her, but Dalton shoved him back. "Stay where you are," he said. Ruth looked at Samuel once. Just once. Her eyes were dry. She did not cry. She did not speak. She looked at him, then turned her gaze away. Dalton took her to the barn and locked her inside. The inquiry began 2 days later. The county sheriff, Thomas Garrett, arrived at the estate with deputy and a clerk to take statements. He questioned Edmund Harrow first, then Caroline, then several of the enslaved people who had been nearby when the fire began. Harrow's account was simple. He had been asleep when the fire started. He woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of his wife screaming. He got his family out as quickly as he could. He believed the fire was caused by a lantern left burning in the kitchen or possibly a spark from the hearth. When pressed, however, he admitted that Ruth had been seen near the kitchen building shortly before the fire began. When asked why she might have been there, he hesitated. "There was an incident earlier in the day," he said finally. "A child was sold. The child's mother was upset. Sheriff Garrett wrote something in his ledger. Upset enough to set fire to your house?" Harrow did not answer directly. "I don't know what she was thinking," he said. "But she was the last person seen near the kitchen before the fire started." The sheriff interviewed Ruth the following day. She was still locked in the barn, her hands wrapped in strips of cloth Bess had brought her. She sat on the dirt floor with her back against the wall, staring at nothing. "Did you set the fire?" Garrett asked. Ruth did not answer. "If you confess, it'll go easier for you," he said. "The judge might show leniency." Ruth looked up at him. Her eyes were hollow. "What will you do to me?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse from screaming the day before. "That's up to the judge," Garrett replied. "Will you hang me?" Garrett shifted uncomfortably. "That's up to the judge," he said again. Ruth looked away. "Then it doesn't matter what I say." The inquiry ended 3 days later. The official finding was inconclusive. There was no direct evidence that Ruth had set the fire, only suspicion and circumstantial facts. But there was also no explanation that fully accounted for what had happened. Edmund Harrow, despite everything, did not push for a trial. Some said he wanted to avoid attention. A trial would bring newspapers, questions, scrutiny. People would ask why he had sold a baby on Christmas morning. They would examine his debts, his business dealings, his ledgers. All of it would become public. Others said he already knew what a trial would expose, that he had sold a child for $200 in silver, that he had torn a family apart to pay a debt, and that he had done it on Christmas of all days. Whatever his reasons, Harrow made a decision. Ruth would be sold quietly and quickly, sent far enough away that the story would not follow her. 3 weeks later, a broker from Charleston arrived at the estate. His name was Marcus Finch, and he specialized in what he called difficult cases, enslaved people who had run away, fought back, or caused trouble. He paid less than market value, but he paid in cash and asked no questions. He gave Edmund Harrow $150 for Ruth, $50 less than Harrow had received for Lily. Ruth was taken away on a cold morning in late January. She did not say goodbye to Samuel. She did not look back at the quarters, the fields, or the blackened ruins of the main house. She climbed into the back of Finch's wagon and sat down, her hands still wrapped in bandages, her face empty of expression. Samuel watched her go. He stood in the yard outside their cabin, his hands clenched into fists, his jaw set tight. He did not cry. He did not speak. He stood there until the wagon disappeared down the road. That night, he went back into the cabin and found the small wooden rabbit he had carved for Lily. He held it for a long time, running his fingers over the smooth surface, remembering the way Lily had laughed when he made a hop across the table. Then he wrapped it in a piece of cloth and buried it beneath the floorboards, in the corner where Lily's cradle had once stood. The years that followed were hard-won for the Hargrove estate. Edmund Hargrove rebuilt, but it cost time and money he did not have. He borrowed from banks in Greensboro and Raleigh, putting up portions of the land as collateral. He hired new workers to replace the ones he had sold, but they were expensive, and the tobacco harvest remained unpredictable. By 1860, the estate was barely breaking even. Hargrove constructed a new house, smaller and plainer than the original, with fewer rooms and no decorative details. It was functional, nothing more. He also rebuilt the kitchen as a separate structure, this time placing it farther from the main house, with a stone foundation and a brick chimney that rose well above the roofline. He became obsessed with fire safety. Every door in the new house had a lock. Every window had shutters that could be barred from the inside. Buckets of water were stationed at regular intervals around the property, and a bell was installed near the main house to be rung in an emergency. He kept a rifle beside his bed and slept poorly. Caroline never fully recovered from the fire. Her ankle healed badly, leaving her with a permanent limp, but the physical injury was minor compared to the damage done to her mind. She developed a terror of fire that bordered on obsession. She refused to allow candles in the house, insisting on oil lamps only, and even then only when someone was present. She would not let the boys play near the hearth. She suffered nightmares, waking in the middle of the night, screaming that she smelled smoke. By 1861, she had stopped leaving the house altogether. She spent her days in the upstairs bedroom, reading the same books again and again, writing letters to her sisters that she never sent. She rarely spoke to Edmund, and when she did, it was to ask about the locks on the doors or whether the water buckets were full. The boys grew up in the shadow of the fire. William, the older one, became quiet and withdrawn. He woke at night, sometimes crying, saying he dreamed of flames. James, the younger, developed a stutter that never fully went away. Among the enslaved people, the fire was spoken of only in whispers. They did not talk about it openly, not where Hargrove or Dalton might hear, but among themselves they told the story of Ruth and Lily, of Christmas morning, of the way Ruth had walked into the main house carrying a burning log. Some said she had been right, that Hargrove deserved to lose his house, his wealth, his sense of safety, that he had taken something from her that could never be replaced, and she had taken something from him in return. Others said it had been a mistake, that Ruth had only made things worse for herself and everyone else, that the fire brought nothing but more suffering. But everyone agreed on one thing. Ruth had made a choice. If she could not have her daughter, Edmund Hargrove would not have his house. Samuel never spoke of Ruth after she was taken away. He continued working in the tobacco barns as before, but he was quieter. He stopped carving. He stopped singing. He kept to himself, and people learned not to ask him questions. In the spring of 1861, when the war began, several of the younger men on the estate tried to run, hoping to reach Union lines. 2 succeeded. 3 were caught and brought back. Samuel did not try to flee. He kept working day after day, his face blank, his hands moving through the familiar motions of stripping tobacco leaves and hanging them to dry. In 1863, Cyrus Dalton, the overseer, was conscripted into the Confederate Army. He was killed at Gettysburg in July of that year. Afterward, Edmund Hargrove attempted to manage the estate himself, but he was overwhelmed. The tobacco crops failed 2 years in a row. The workers, sensing that the war might bring change, became less compliant. Some simply stopped working, daring Hargrove to respond. By 1865, when the war ended, the estate was in ruins. The fields were overgrown. The barns were collapsing. The new house, barely 5 years old, already looked worn and neglected. When emancipation reached North Carolina, Samuel was among the first to leave. He walked off the estate on a warm morning in May. Carrying nothing but the clothes on his back and a small wooden rabbit he dug up from beneath the floorboards of his cabin. He walked north along the roads toward Virginia. He did not know where he was going. He had no plan. He only knew he could not stay. He never found Lily. He tried. He asked everyone he met if they had heard of a light-skinned girl, about 8 years old by then, who might have been sold in Richmond in 1858. No one knew anything. The records had been destroyed during the war. The traders were dead or scattered. The trail went cold. Eventually, he settled in a small town in Southern Virginia, working as a carpenter. He never married again. He never had other children. He kept a wooden rabbit on a shelf in his room, and sometimes late at night, he would take it down and hold it, remembering. Samuel died in 1891 at the age of 63. He was buried in a small cemetery outside the town in an unmarked grave. Edmund Hargrove held on to what remained of the estate until 1871. By then he was 47 years old and looked 20 years older. His hair had turned gray. His hands shook. He had developed a persistent cough that doctors said came from the smoke he had inhaled the night of the fire, even though more than a decade had passed. In the spring of 1871, he suffered what the doctor called a failure of the heart. He collapsed in the study of the new house, the same room where he kept his ledgers. One of the workers found him there, slumped over the desk, his hand still wrapped around a pen as if he had been writing when it happened. He was buried in the family plot on the estate, beside his father and grandfather. Caroline and the boys left the estate shortly afterward and returned to Charleston. Caroline died in 1875. William found work as a clerk for a shipping company and never married. James moved west of Texas and vanished from the records entirely. The estate itself passed through several owners over the following decades. The newer house was torn down in 1885. The land was divided and sold off in parcels. By 1900, the only visible traces of the original Hargrove estate were the family cemetery and a few crumbling foundations swallowed by undergrowth. But the story did not end there. In 1923, a man named Robert Vance purchased 50 acres of the former Hargrove land, including the grove where the main house had once stood. Vance was a World War I veteran from Pennsylvania who had moved south in search of inexpensive farmland. He was in his early 40s, unmarried, with noticeable limp caused by a piece of shrapnel lodged in his left leg during the Battle of the Argonne Forest. He cleared part of the grove and built a small house near the creek. It was a simple place, 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and a front porch. He planted a vegetable garden and kept a handful of chickens. He lived alone and seemed content with the quiet. For the first year, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. He worked his land, sold vegetables at the market in town, and kept to himself. The neighbors were polite enough, though they found him strange. He didn't attend church. He didn't socialize. He worked and went home. In the summer of 1924, things began to change. It started with small disturbances. Vance would wake in the middle of the night with the smell of smoke in the air. Not with smoke from a fireplace, but something sharper, acrid, chemical like burning fabric or tar. He would get up and check the house, but nothing was ever burning. The hearth was cold, the stove untouched. The smell lingered for a few minutes, then faded. He told himself it was his imagination. He had smelled burning things in France, with earth, flesh. He convinced himself his mind was replaying old memories from the war. Then he began hearing footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps on the porch, as if someone were pacing back and forth. He would rise from his bed and open the door, only to find the porch empty and the yard dark and still. And sometimes late at night, he heard a woman singing. The sound was faint, barely audible, a low, mournful melody. The language was unfamiliar, or perhaps it was English, distorted beyond recognition. He could never make out the words. He tried to ignore it, telling himself it was the wind, or an animal, or his mind again betraying him. But the sounds continued. Night after night, the footsteps, the singing, the smell of smoke. In the fall of 1924, Vance decided to dig a new well. The old one near the house was beginning to run dry, and he needed a more reliable source of water. He chose a spot about 30 yards from the house, near where he believed the original main house had stood. He began digging on a cool October morning. The ground was dense, packed clay mixed with stones. He worked slowly, breaking the soil with a pick and clearing it with a shovel. By midday, he was about 4 feet down when the shovel struck something solid. At first, he thought it was a rock, but as he cleared away the dirt, he saw metal. A rectangular iron box, about the size of a small trunk, badly rusted. It was locked. Vance stared at it for a long time. Part of him wanted to leave it where it was, to fill in the hole and pretend he had never found it. But another part of him, the part that had survived the war, that had learned to confront things head-on, needed to know what was inside. He used a hammer to break the lock. It took several blows before the corroded metal finally gave way. Inside were papers, ledgers, old, yellowed pages brittle with age. Some were water-damaged, the ink faded and unreadable, but others were still clear. Vance lifted them out carefully and spread them on the ground. They were account books, records of transactions, dates, names, prices. He read slowly, his hands trembling slightly. They were records of people, enslaved people, bought and sold like livestock. Each entry listed a name, an age, a brief description, and a price. Jacob, male, age 28, strong back, good worker, $800. Sarah, female, age 19, house-trained, $600. Moses, male, age 35, skilled carpenter, $900. Page after page, dozens of names, dozens of lives reduced to numbers in a ledger. Then, near the bottom of one page, he found an entry that made him stop. Lily, female, born March 12, 1857, light-skinned, sold December 25, 1858, $200. Beneath it, written in different handwriting, smaller, cramped, in pencil instead of ink, was a single sentence. He took my child. I took his house. We are even now. Vance sat back on his heels, staring at the words. He didn't know who had written them. He didn't know the entire story, but he knew enough. He looked up at the grove, at the trees growing thick over the ruins of the old house. He thought about the smell of smoke, the footsteps, the singing, and he understood. He gathered the ledgers, carried them back to his house, and burned them in the fireplace. He watched the pages curl and blacken, the names disappearing into ash. He didn't want them. He didn't want to know anymore. But burning the ledgers changed nothing. The smells continued, the footsteps, the singing. By the spring of 1925, Vance could no longer endure it. He sold the property and moved back north to Pennsylvania. He never spoke of what he had found, at least not for many years. It wasn't until 1954, when he was 73 years old and living in a veteran's home in Harrisburg, that he finally told the story to a reporter from a local newspaper researching the history of Randolph County. I don't believe in ghosts, Vance said, sitting in a chair by the window of the home, gazing out at the gray Pennsylvania sky. I don't believe in ghosts, he said. I never have. But I'll tell you this, something was wrong with that land. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was my mind. Maybe it was the war. But I couldn't stay there. The reporter asked if he had ever told anyone else about the ledgers. Vance shook his head. Who would I tell? And what would it change? They're all dead now. Everyone involved. It's just history. And yet history, as it turns out, does not always stay buried. In 1968, a graduate student named Margaret Colby was researching her thesis on enslaved families in the antebellum South. She was 24 years old, studying at Duke University, and had been combing through courthouse records in Randolph County when she came across a brief reference to the horror of a state fire. It was only a few lines in an old inquiry report from 1859, but something about it caught her attention. A fire on Christmas night, a woman suspected of arson, a child sold that same morning. She began digging deeper. She located the inquiry report, short and inconclusive. She found property records showing the estate being sold off in pieces over the years. She examined tax documents, census records, and family histories. And then, in a box of miscellaneous papers that had been misfiled in the courthouse basement, she found a letter. It was dated January 15th, 1859, and addressed to Edmund Harrove. It was written by Reverend Thomas Whitley, a Methodist minister who had served several congregations in the area. The letter was brief, handwritten in careful script on yellow paper. Mr. Harrove, I write to you with a heavy heart. I have heard what transpired on Christmas Day, and I have heard what followed. I do not presume to judge you, for judgment belongs to God alone, but I must tell you this. The woman Ruth came to me before she was taken away. She did not confess to setting the fire. She did not deny it either. She said only this: he took my child. I took his house. We are even now. I fear, Mr. Harrove, that you are not even. I fear that what you have sown, you will reap in ways you cannot yet imagine. I urge you to seek forgiveness, not from me, but from the Lord, and to make amends where you can. Your servant in Christ, Reverend Thomas Whitley. Margaret Colby made a copy of the letter and included it in her thesis. The thesis was titled Fractured Families: The Impact of Child Sales on Enslaved Communities in North Carolina, 1820 to 1865. It was carefully researched and thoroughly argued, but it was never published. In 1970, she left graduate school to get married and never returned to complete her degree. A copy of the thesis, however, ended up in the archives of the North Carolina State University Library, where it sat largely unnoticed for decades. In 2003, a historian named Dr. Alan Pritchard discovered Colby's thesis while researching a book on resistance among enslaved people in North Carolina. He was in his 50s, a professor at a small college in Virginia, and had spent most of his career studying the ways enslaved people resisted the system that oppressed them. The letter from Reverend Whitley stood out to him immediately. Dr. Pritchard decided to investigate further. Over the next 2 years, he tracked down every piece of information he could find about the Harrove estate, Ruth, and the fire. He searched property records, tax documents, and family histories. He looked for descendants of people who had been enslaved on the estate. He traveled to South Carolina in an attempt to locate records of Ruth after she was sold, but found nothing. The documents had been destroyed, lost, or never created. What he did find were descendants, people whose great-great-grandparents had been enslaved on the Harrove estate, people who had heard stories passed down quietly through their families. One of them was a woman named Evelyn Morris. She was 91 years old, living in a nursing home in Greensboro. She was sharp-minded and clear-eyed, and she remembered the stories her grandmother had told her. My great-great-grandmother's name was Dinah, Evelyn said, sitting by the window of her room with her hands folded in her lap. She was Ruth's mother. She died when Ruth was young. But before she died, she made Ruth promise something. She made her promise that no matter what happened, she'd never let them break her. She'd never let them take everything. Evelyn paused, looking out at the parking lot below. When they took Lily, Ruth kept that promise. She didn't let them take everything. She took something back. Dr. Pritchard asked if Evelyn knew what had happened to Ruth after she was sold. She died, Evelyn said quietly, in South Carolina. I don't know exactly when. Sometime before the war ended, I think. But before she died, she sent a message back. It was passed along through people who traveled between plantations. The message was simple. Tell Samuel I kept my promise. Pritchard asked what the promise was. Evelyn looked at him. The promise she made to her mother, that she'd never let them break her. Dr. Pritchard published his findings in a journal article in 2005. The article was titled Resistance and Retribution: The Harrove Estate Fire of 1858. It appeared in the Journal of Southern History and received some attention in academic circles. A handful of historians cited it in their own work, but the story remained largely unknown outside those circles until 2017. In that year, a documentary filmmaker named Jessica Hanley was working on a project about overlooked acts of resistance during slavery. She was in her 30s, based in New York, and had been searching for stories that challenged conventional ideas of what resistance looked like. When she came across Pritchard's article, she contacted him. They spoke for hours. Pritchard shared everything he had uncovered: the letter, the interviews, the records. He told her about Evelyn Morris and the message Ruth had sent back. Jessica was captivated. She decided to make a documentary about the story. In the spring of 2017, she and Pritchard traveled together to Randolph County. They located the land where the Harrove estate had once stood. It was now part of a larger farm owned by a family that had held the property for 3 generations. The current owner, a man named Dale Hutchins, was in his 60s, a tobacco farmer who had inherited the land from his father. Jessica and Pritchard explained their work, and Hutchins gave them permission to explore the property. They brought ground-penetrating radar equipment and a small team of archaeologists from the University of North Carolina. For 2 weeks, they surveyed the land, mapping the locations of former structures and searching for anything that might have survived beneath the soil. What they found was remarkable. Beneath a grove of pine trees marking the site where the main house once stood, they uncovered the remains of the foundation. The bricks were blackened and fractured by fire, but they were still there, buried under decades of soil, roots, and fallen needles. And beneath that foundation, they discovered something else. A small, carefully constructed, stone-lined pit hidden beneath what would have been the floor of the study. Inside the pit were the remnants of burned ledgers, pages charred and brittle, their edges crumbling at the slightest touch, yet still partially legible. The archaeologists excavated the fragments slowly, using brushes and tweezers to lift what remained. And among those pages, they found something that should not have been there: a small wooden carving of a rabbit. It was about 3 inches long, carved from a single piece of wood. The details were unmistakable: the long ears, the rounded body, the tiny tail. It had been shaped with care, with patience, with affection. Jessica held it in her hands, turning it over gently. She looked at Pritchard. "This is Samuel's carving," she said. "The one he made for Lily." Pritchard nodded slowly. "But how did it get here?" "Samuel left after the war. He took it with him." They looked at each other, arriving at the same conclusion. "Ruth," Jessica said. "Ruth must have had it. Somehow she got it back. And she buried it here, beneath the house, beneath the ledgers." The implications were staggering. Ruth had not set the fire in a blind moment of rage. She had planned it. She had gone straight to the study, to the ledgers that recorded every human being Edmund Harrove had bought and sold. She had burned them not only to destroy the house, but to erase as much of that record as she could, to undo, in whatever small way possible, the paper trail of suffering that had torn families apart. And she had left the carving there as a marker, a message. Later, reviewing the findings, Dr. Pritchard offered his interpretation in an interview for the documentary. "Ruth knew she couldn't save Lily," he said. "She knew she couldn't undo what had already been done. But she could make sure Harrove's records, his careful documentation of human suffering, didn't survive. She could take that from him." And she did. The carving was her way of saying, "This is for Lily. This is for all of us. You can't erase us. We were here. We mattered." Jessica Hang's documentary, The Fire That Ruth Set, premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2018. It won the award for Best Documentary Feature and was later acquired by a major streaming service, where it reached millions of viewers. The film sparked intense debate. Some saw Ruth as a hero, a woman who fought back against an impossible system in the only way left to her. Others argued that the fire was an act of desperation rather than resistance, and that romanticizing it ignored the danger it posed to others and the complexity of her situation. Historians debated the evidence. Some questioned whether Ruth truly planned the fire or whether the carving might have ended up in the pit by chance. Others pointed to the message written in the ledger: "He took my child. I took his house. We are even now," as clear proof of intent. But everyone agreed on one thing. Ruth had made a choice. On Christmas night in 1858, she decided that if she could not have her daughter, Edmund Hargrove would not have his house, his records, or his sense of security. She took something back. The land where the Hargrove estate once stood is quiet now. The pine grove remains, though some of the trees have been cleared over the years to make room for new growth. The foundations of the old buildings are still there, hidden beneath the soil, slowly being reclaimed by the earth. In 2019, the County Historical Society installed a small marker near the road. It is a granite slab about 3 feet tall with a bronze plaque that reads, "Site of the Hargrove Estate. Established 1791. Destroyed by fire December 25, 1858. A place of labor, loss, and resistance. In memory of Ruth, Lily, Samuel, and all those whose names were lost." Dale Hutchins, the current owner of the land, has said he doesn't mind visitors as long as they are respectful. Some people come to see the site. Some leave flowers near the marker. A few have left small wooden carvings, rabbits, birds, horses, in memory of Lily and the other children taken from their families. The wooden rabbit found beneath the foundation is now part of the collection at the North Carolina Museum of History in Raleigh. It is displayed in a glass case alongside fragments of the burned ledgers and a copy of Reverend Whitley's letter. The exhibit is titled Resistance and Remembrance, the Hargrove Estate Fire. Ruth's final resting place is unknown. Despite extensive research, no record of her death has ever been found. There is no grave marker, no documentation of what became of her after she was sold to South Carolina in 1859. Some researchers believe she died during the war, when record-keeping across the South collapsed. Others think she survived, took a new name, and disappeared into the chaos of Reconstruction. But her story, once buried in courthouse basements and family memory, is now part of the historical record. Lily's fate remains a mystery. Josiah Trent's records were destroyed in a warehouse fire in Richmond in 1862, leaving no way to trace what happened to her after she left Randolph County on Christmas Day, 1858. Some descendants of enslaved families in the region have pursued DNA testing, hoping to uncover connections, but nothing conclusive has emerged. There are theories. Some believe Lily was sold to a family in Richmond and raised as a house servant. Others think she was resold farther south, to Georgia or Alabama. A few believe she died young, a victim of disease or neglect, her death never recorded. The truth is, we will probably never know. Edmund Hargrove's grave still lies in the family plot on what is now private property about a mile from where the estate once stood. The plot is overgrown, the headstones tilted and weathered. His descendants, scattered across the country, have had mixed reactions to the story. Some have expressed regret for what their ancestor had done. A few reached out to historical societies and museums, offering family documents and photographs. Others chose silence, unwilling to engage with a past they found too shameful to confront. In 2020, a descendant of Edmund Hargrove, a woman named Patricia Hargrove-Chin, living in California, published an op-ed in a major newspaper. In it, she openly acknowledged her ancestors' actions and voiced her support for reparations and historical accountability. "I can't undo what Edmund Hargrove did," she wrote. "I can't bring back Lily or Ruth or any of the people he bought and sold, but I can acknowledge the truth. I can say that what he did was wrong, and I can support efforts to make amends in whatever small ways are possible." The op-ed sparked further debate. Some praised her for speaking publicly. Others criticized her, arguing that acknowledgement without concrete action meant little. But the conversation continued, and perhaps that was the most important result of all. The fire Ruth set burned for hours on that Christmas night in 1858, consuming not just wood and brick, but the illusion of order men like Edmund Hargrove tried to impose on a system built on human suffering. It did not end slavery. It did not bring Lily back. It did not even destroy all of Hargrove's records. Some survived, hidden in that iron box beneath the ground. But the fire left a mark, a scar on the land, and on history that refused to fade. In the years since the documentary's release, the story of Ruth and the Harrow Estate fire has become part of a broader conversation about slavery, resistance, and memory. It is taught in classrooms. It is discussed in book clubs. It is cited in academic papers and explored in public lectures. And every year on Christmas Day, a small group of people gathers near the marker by the roadside. They are descendants of enslaved families from the region, historians, activists, and others moved by the story. They hold a brief ceremony, spoken words, a song, a moment of silence. They leave flowers and small wooden carvings. They remember, because that, more than anything else, is what Ruth wanted. Not revenge exactly, not justice in a legal sense, but remembrance, a refusal to let the story be buried and forgotten. She wanted people to know that she was there, that Lily was there, that they mattered. And now, more than a century and a half later, we do know. We remember. The story of Ruth and the fire she set on Christmas night in 1858 is a story of loss and rage, of impossible choices forced upon people in impossible circumstances. It is the story of a mother who lost her child and decided that if she could not have justice, she would have retribution. It is the story of a man who valued profit over humanity and paid a price for it, though perhaps not a high enough one. But most of all, it is a story about resistance, about the ways people fight back even when the odds are overwhelming, about the ways they refuse to be erased, even when the system is designed to erase them. Ruth could not save Lily. She could not free herself. She could not dismantle the system that enslaved her, but she could light a fire. And she did. And that fire, in its own way, is still burning. What do you think of this story? Do you believe Ruth's act was justice, or simply tragedy compounding tragedy? Was she a hero who fought back against an evil system, or a desperate woman who made an unbearable choice? Leave your comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story and want more dark historical mysteries like this one, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who loves untold history. There are countless stories still buried in the past, waiting to be uncovered. See you in the next.